two Philippine boats breached a Chinese Coast Guard blockade in a dangerous confrontation in the disputed South China Sea. Pictures, recorded by the Philippine Coast Guard, show the latest sovereignty standoff between Beijing and Manila in the disputed South China Sea. Chinese Coast Guard ships blocked the passage to Philippine Coast Guard vessels for hours on Tuesday near the Second Thomas Shoal, an area claimed by the Philippines, where they maintain a military ship and had sent supplies. The dangerous encounter is the latest flare-up from the long-seething territorial disputes in the busy sea that involve China, the Philippines, Vietnam, Malaysia, Taiwan, and Brunei. It is regarded as an Asian flashpoint and has become a delicate fault line in the U.S.-China rivalry. In Tuesday's incident, a Chinese Coast Guard ship came as close as 46 meters to the Philippine Coast Guard ship, which maneuvered quickly to avoid a collision. All the Philippine vessels sailed away without further incident after the supplies and a fresh crew of Filipino sailors were delivered to the military outpost on a long marooned Philippine Navy ship at the shoal. China, asserting its claim over the region, then allowed the passage of two vessels carrying supplies, citing humanitarian reasons. Beijing is embroiled in numerous sovereignty disputes in these waters. Despite setbacks in international courts, it is pursuing an increasingly assertive policy, causing concern among other regional nations and the United States, which closely monitors China's activities in waters through which one-third of the world's maritime traffic flows. After a Chinese Coast Guard ship used a water cannon against a Philippine supply boat on August 5th, Washington renewed a warning that it is obligated to defend its long-standing treaty ally if Filipino forces, aircraft, and vessels come under an armed attack, including in the South China Sea. All of the Philippine warships sailed away without incident after supplies and a new crew of Filipino sailors were transferred to the military outpost on a long marooned Philippine Navy ship at the shoal. The Chinese Coast Guard blockade and other unsafe activities were condemned as violations of international regulations intended to prevent marine collisions by Coast Guard spokesperson Commodore J. Tariella. In preparation for any diplomatic action against China, he announced that the Coast Guard would send a report to the Department of Foreign Affairs in Manila. The first clashes occurred Monday night, when a Chinese Coast Guard ship began to pursue the Philippine vessels. At one point, a guy identifying himself as a member of one of the Chinese Coast Guard ships warned, to avoid miscalculation, leave and keep out, otherwise, you will bear full responsibility for all the consequences. In a flurry of radio broadcast exchanges on Tuesday morning, both parties maintained their territorial rights. Chinese Coast Guard warships continually crossed the bows of the two Philippine Coast Guard ships. Later, up to three were positioned in front of the motionless Cabra. As the Chinese ships got perilously close to the wooden-hulled supply boats, the two smaller ships were able to maneuver through the shallows and into the shoal. Security officials in the Philippines allege that as part of security cooperation, they have already received intelligence data and surveillance images taken in the disputed waters from their American and other international counterparts. Although it has maintained that freedom of air and navigation, as well as peaceful dispute resolution, are in its national interest, the U.S. has no claims to the South China Sea. After a Chinese Coast Guard ship fired a water cannon at a Philippine supply boat on August 5th, Washington renewed a warning that it is compelled to defend its ancient treaty ally if Filipino personnel, aircraft, and boats come under armed attack, particularly in the South China Sea. Tuesday, while an American Navy jet buzzed overhead, 2 Philippine ships disobeyed a Chinese Coast Guard blockade in the disputed South China Sea to deliver food and supplies to Filipino Marines stationed on a disputed shoal. However, during the tense standoff near 2nd Thomas Shoal, 2 Philippine Coast Guard warships escorting the supply boats were obstructed for almost 5 hours by at least 4 Chinese Coast Guard ships. The hazardous encounter is the most recent escalation in the long-running territorial disputes that have been raging in the packed ocean between China, the Philippines, Vietnam, Malaysia, Taiwan, and Brunei. It has developed into a delicate fault line in the US-China dispute and is regarded as a hotspot in Asia. As part of a new strategy to draw attention to China's increasingly aggressive actions in the South China Sea, which Beijing claims virtually in its entirety, the Philippine Coast Guard invited a small group of journalists, including 2 from the Associated Press, to join its ships that secured the supply boats. One Chinese Coast Guard ship reportedly approached as close as 46 meters, 50 yards, when it passed the bow of the BRP Cabra to obstruct the Philippine Coast Guard ship, according to a Coast Guard officer on board the Cabra who was unable to be identified according to official protocol. The Cabra was moving swiftly to avoid a collision. 4 Chinese Coast Guard ships and 4 suspected militia vessels surrounded the Cabra and another Coast Guard ship, the BRP Sindangan, forcing them to come to a stop. After supplies and a new crew of Filipino sailors were delivered to the military outpost on a long-marooned Philippine Navy ship at the shoal, all of the Philippine warships sailed away without incident.